All right, now what I'm going to do now is pretend that I were leading a tour at the ancient site of Dan. Tel Dan is in the northern side of Israel. Tel Dan was a round city. It had massive earthen fortifications, and there was a spring that formed a river here at Tel Dan. The river was probably diverted to surround at least part of the city in the ancient world, or perhaps even all of the city, creating sort of a defensive moat to protect the city. One of the strategic aspects about the site of Dan is that it is one of the sources of the Jordan River. As the Jordan River begins, it really comes from four different sources in northern Israel, and one of them is the spring at Tel Dan. It is the largest spring, the largest headwater in the Jordan River. It bases at Mount Hermon. Now, these springs are all part of a system that flows out of the northern mountain range in Mount Hermon. And really, regardless of the season of year, even in the hot summertime, the springs remain quite strong as well, providing the area and the region a very lush and water-sourced opportunity for crops and for agriculture and that sort of thing. Now, the site of Dan has been the longest continuous excavation in the entire site of Israel. Avraham Biran began excavating since the mid-1900s. One of the ways that they know that this ancient site is the biblical location of Dan is because there was a Greek inscription found that says, "The God who is at Dan." That verifies that the identification of the site is in fact Tel Dan. Now, Dan is a Hebrew word that means judge. And when you say Tel Dan, you're really talking about the hill, the mound of the judge. Now, there's a number of biblical references that speak of Dan. Abraham, all the way back in Genesis chapter 14, pursued 5 Mesopotamian kings and overtook them at the site of Dan. The tribe of Dan, in its original allotment, had trouble with the Ammonites and the Philistines. They moved to a site called Laish, and they renamed it Dan. That's in Judges chapter 18. The site of Dan in Judges chapter 20 marks the very northern limit of Israel in many biblical passages. Now, one of the most fascinating sites at Tel Dan is what archaeologists call the high place of Dan. Ami Mazar is an archaeologist, and he said the ritual center at Dan is the only structure mentioned in the Bible that has been positively identified in archaeological excavations. Now, Ami Mazar is not a believer. He does not believe really the inerrancy of the Bible. So for a non-believer to say that is quite significant. The high place that we're looking at here was built by King Jeroboam in 1 Kings chapter 12. Nearly every archaeologist would agree that this elevated podium up here was constructed by Jeroboam to hold his golden calf that he built so that his people in the northern kingdom would not have to go to the southern kingdom in Jerusalem and offer their allegiance there. Not only that, there is another very interesting thing to see at Tel Dan, and that is a Middle Bronze gate. Now, Middle Bronze period was the time of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And there is a gate that was found on the very last day of an excavation season in the 1970s, and they found a mud brick gate dating all the way back to about 18 or 19, perhaps even 2000 BC, during the time of Abraham and the patriarchs. Now, they also found a very important area, and they could call that the Israelite Gate, built in the 10th or 9th century BC. It is a double gate system for fortification, for strength, so that enemies could not come and break into the city. But right in front of the gate, they found a small platform where pillars supported perhaps a canopy over it. And we know that this might have been a place where maybe a king could have sat at the city gate and guarded who came in and who went out of the city. But in the plaza, right outside the city gate, they found an inscription that was in the old Hebrew script, Paleo-Hebrew, which talks about the house of David. Very important inscription which shows a number of things. Number one, this is a very old site that dates back to Old Testament time, but second of all, it shows that David was actually a historical figure. I mean, even though we believe the Bible is absolutely true, but it is encouraging to know that archaeology and inscriptions can encourage and validate what the scriptures say.